Before I got involved in politics, I spent 28 years in the private sector. Small businesses, medium-sized businesses, a Fortune 25 company. That Fortune 25 company was Procter & Gamble. I spent 14 years with that company, and one of our assignments took us to mainland China. I remember when we were offered the assignment and we took the job. That time we had our little boy David, our first child. He was about 18 months old. And our second child, Annie, she was just born. She was just a new baby, several weeks old. And we moved to Guangzhou. That was in January of 1992. And we were part of leading the team that pioneered the operations for Procter & Gamble back in the early days of the expansion of the company. Today, that geography, in fact, I think is P&G's second largest geography as it relates to sales in the world. And I remember we would spend some time with other American families from around the world. There were American families, there were families from virtually every continent. These expats living over there would spend time going to orphanages. We'd go in these orphanages, usually on a Saturday. We'd hold these babies. Sometimes they had disabilities. Some of these babies never received human touch, except for when these families, oftentimes American families, would go and hold them. And on a positive note, it built in a conscience, that orphanage. They knew the Americans were coming on Saturday. Things got cleaned up. The babies were getting a little better fed. And that was a good thing. But we were fighting on behalf of those who had life and weren't being treated very well. I want to tell you a couple other stories about things that happened while we were over there in China. I remember I was running a large organization. I had many Chinese employees who were working for me. Remember one day one of my key managers came. He said, "Steve, I need to go to the police station this afternoon." And I said, "Oh, my word, is there something wrong? Do you need some help?" He said, "No, not really. My wife is pregnant, and we did not have permission from the authorities to get pregnant." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "Well, that might mean they would terminate the pregnancy and require it." At that moment, I looked at that employee, one of my key managers, and I said, "I will do all that I need to do, all that I can, to ensure that we protect that baby, assuming you want to keep that baby." And he said, "My wife and I do want to keep that baby." So I said, "Well, what does help look like? How can I help you?" And he said, "Well, could I get a case of shampoo?" Now, we were making some well-known brands, Head & Shoulders shampoo, Vidal Sassoon, Pantene. We were making Crest toothpaste, then Tide. We had these world-class brands, and so I gave him a case of shampoo, and he went downtown to see the authorities. That case of shampoo saved the life of that baby, and they now have a beautiful grown daughter. Another day I was at work, and my phone rang. My wife, Cindy, called me, and she said, "Steve, you won't believe it, but we just had twin baby girls dropped off on our doorstep in our apartment in Guangzhou." I said, "Twin baby girls, really?" And at that point, we had 3 children. So we went over to China with 2. We had 2 more, in fact, while we were living over there. By that time, we had 3. And she said they were just infants. And the story behind that, there was a mother who lived in the countryside who had one baby, a little girl, and she got pregnant with twins. And because of the one-child policy, she was in trouble, and she fled to the countryside. In fact, she was hiding in a remote location, and her mother would come out to feed the mother and the babies to keep them alive. To make a long story short, we battled for a couple of years because there was no paper trail for these 2 beautiful Chinese babies. And there was a American family that worked for Procter & Gamble, one of my associates, that wanted to adopt those babies. And I can tell you another happy ending to that story. They are now two beautiful young women who are living in the United States as U.S. citizens. These stories demonstrate the importance of saving one life at a time. I share these stories, Mr. President, because today is the 45th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade. And I know there's a lot going on at the moment. The Senate just voted to reopen the government. The House will follow shortly. The President will sign that. Common sense has prevailed. We've got the government open again. And in fact, we're reauthorizing the Children's Health Insurance Program for 6 years. But today, in the midst of all of these important issues that we're dealing with, we must not forget that each year in the United States, over 600,000 babies lose their fight for life due to abortion. No case of shampoo was able to save them. They never got the chance to be adopted. It's over 600,000 babies a year. 60 million since the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade in 1973, 45 years ago today. I told you a little bit about David when I started my remarks, our oldest son of our 4 children. David was born in the United States before we moved to China. And I think as a parent, and if you're a parent, you remember those new babies, you take them to get their shots. It's much harder on mom and dad than it is on the baby. The baby's screaming and crying, the pain they're feeling, and you yearn as a parent to try to take away that pain. It's part of the natural response of any mom or dad. But tragically in this nation, there are over 13,000 babies aborted that are over 20 weeks old. You see, at 20 weeks, that baby can yawn, it can make faces, it can stretch. And the science tells us that babies at 20 weeks of age can feel pain. So we think about the pain that a parent feels when a newborn maybe receives a vaccination. Imagine the pain a baby at 20 weeks and beyond feels if it's being aborted. In fact, when they do in utero surgery, at 20 weeks and beyond, they administer anesthesia to that baby. We must continue to fight to protect life at all stages. But certainly where we can take steps, bipartisan steps, to protect life, we should. And I think we might be able to agree that banning elective abortions for babies that are 20 weeks or older, that's 5 months. It's well past the halfway stage in gestation. We should do that. At the center of this debate is a tiny child. And that baby can't speak for itself yet. Those babies we fought for in China, whether it's that baby that was saved by a case of shampoo, or those twin baby girls that were dropped off on our doorstep, they couldn't speak and fight for their lives. The babies in the womb, their cries aren't audible. We at least could hear the cry of those twin baby girls. And that is why we must act on their behalf. In fact, studies have shown that the vast majority of Americans are in favor of prohibiting late-term abortions, of stopping elective abortions after 20 weeks. In fact, if you poll millennials, that number is even higher. Now, why is that? Well, I'm not sure I have the precise answer, but one possibility is technology. In fact, if you have a smartphone, take it out. I can't do that because they're prohibited on the floor of the Senate, so I can't demonstrate it here. But if you had a smartphone where you've got your computer, your iPad, go to Google and just type in 20 weeks. That's all. Don't have to type in baby. Just type in 20 space weeks. And look at what pops up. What you'll see are images of what a baby looks like at 20 weeks. And I think technology is now convincing millennials that what goes on in the womb at 20 weeks is a life. It's not just a piece of flesh. And that's why we need to pass the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. By the way, just last week, the Department of Health and Human Services announced a new Conscience and Religious Freedom Division within its Office of Civil Rights. The administration is committed, and I'm grateful they're committed to enforcing existing conscience laws. I don't believe anyone should be forced to participate in an activity like abortion that violates their own conscience. I'm grateful for this administration's commitment to protecting life and the rights of conscience, and I stand ready to work with them and anyone here on either side of the aisle to advance the cause for life. I've always believed that people will believe those things they discover for themselves. You know, as a parent, you know that. You can teach your children, you can say things to your children, but ultimately, it's a process of them discovering something for themselves before they really will believe something. And I think that's what's going on right now with millennials and the issue of late-term abortions and the issues of life, because technology is showing all of us with the incredible clarity of ultrasounds and getting visibility of what's going on inside and that amazing miracle of life, that indeed it is a life. Since the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade, 60 million babies have lost their lives to abortion. We can honor their memories by acting to end this atrocity. I very much look forward to seeing the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act coming to the floor of the United States Senate. We may have disagreements about when life begins, but let's all agree that we should stop late-term abortions. And 20 weeks is when that little baby can feel pain. I think that's a reasonable place to draw a line to get bipartisan support going forward, as only 7 countries in the world allow these late-term abortions. 7 countries. The United States is on the same list as North Korea. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this most important legislation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.